Okay, all right. Revelry, revelry. That means we're ready to start the show. So I think everyone knows who I am, Donna Lazardic, and I was Bob's sweetheart. Bob's sweetheart of 24 years. So we're so happy to be here and to honor and celebrate the life of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Robert, Bob Vaucher. So Bob was always so passionate about his family and friends, and he never missed an occasion to get together, as you all know. Always ready for a party. So how perfect it is to give thanks for him with all his beloved people here in one place. Yay. You know, a life lived with joy deserves a happy remembrance. And today we're here to share our memorable stories, our laughs, and our happiness over Bob's life that was lived to the very, very fullest. And we sure know that. So our program today, and there's programs on the table, it's full with a curated cross-section of the lives Bob touched across many dimensions. His faith, his family, his friends, his neighbors, his community, and of course the world of aviation. And he loved each and every one of these aspects of his life, and each and every one of you that made those aspects come to life for him. And how very fitting for us to be gathered on the Solberg Airfield, surrounded by World War II aircraft. It's a venue that I don't think you'll see very often. So this is reminiscent of his first flights, and he flew into this very place in the summer of 1941, courting his gal Eleanor, who he married and and had the 3 children by, and was married for 53 years until her passing. And it was the beginning of 80 very fruitful years of thriving here in central New Jersey. So let me make a few introductions. So let me introduce the Vauchers and their significant others. We have Yvonne and Brian Wagner. Suzanne and Bill Stendred. Suzanne and Bill. We have David and Dr. Greg Kerr. And cousin Jimmy Schmitz. Jimmy Fritz, I'm sorry, not Schmitz. Jim Fritz. Jim. The Vauchers didn't have many cousins, but the ones they have are so dear. And we have our Civil Air Patrol. We have Colonel Joe Abig. He's the former commander of the New Jersey Wing. Colonel Joe, there he is. And we had a fly-in here in the Civil Air Patrol plane by the New York Wing. And we have with us, we got the aviators back in the corner because they're all so rowdy. We have elected officials, Bridgewater Councilman Alan Cardilla and Michael Kirsch. They're here. Tim Ring. And Philippe Pedroso is his daughter's move-in day at UNC, so he sent a video, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get a chance to play it, but hopefully we will. And did Brian Gallagher make it here? Brian Gallagher is former Somerset County committeeman and former mayor of Somerville. He was going to try to get here. DNR Greenway Land Trust. Did Linda Mead make it? Oh, hey, Linda. Nice to see you. Linda's the executive director, and James Fiorentino, he's a board member, and he's an internationally recognized artist who recently did a portrait of Bob. So James is here. And then we have our Foothill and other Civic Association people here, Patty and Lou Phillips, David Stempian, Brendan and Lisa Burns, and Jeff and Tricia Foose. They're around here. And there's Somerset County historian, Jesse Havens. Jesse. Wow, and then we have a table, which I called our Healthy Life Team. These are people that kept Bob going the last few years. Is Milena? Did Milena make it? Okay, Milena. Elena cared for Bob. Danielle Bowden and her husband. Danielle was physical therapy and was quite a delight. Rose Shovlin was from the VA with the hearing aids, and he had Rose on speed dial. And Dr. Joe Mealy, a dentist. And did Donna make it here? Donna Wilkin? Okay. And then we have our AV and sound crew, my sister Pat, and she's also photographing. Glenn Stott, Thomas Cerici back there. He's a video expert. He's video us today. Glenn Stott and Tim Scheider. Thank you guys. And helping hands, we got Max and Jillian Burns, young people, right? Younger. Max and Jillian Burns, Molly Foose, Ed S. Nagel, and Heather Decker, his wife Heather. So, my God. So, and then there's everybody else here that I haven't named, and you're all as part of these groups. We have a lot of people from church here as well. So many people made this day possible, and you're listed in the program. Special thanks to the Nagel and Solberg families who have been so dear to Bob these many years, since 1941, and who embraced me as one of their own when I came into Bob's life 24 years ago. So thank you, Solbergs. Where are you? There you are. Okay. Solbergs and Nagels.
Whenever you felt this on the side of the airplane, you knew that the anti-aircraft was getting close to you. You're bringing back memories. I'm just thinking about what you used to have to do. Well, that was a feeling that could never be described. You knew that your life had changed. It had changed overnight. I mean, in some very big ways. I was in training to fly 4-engine airplanes, the B-17. And I had a year to go before I would be able to land a B-17. And Pearl Harbor came along, and I immediately became qualified in any 4-engine airplane whether I'd ever heard or seen of it. I was 22 years old. When you're in the middle of the thing, you don't know that you're being bombarded continuously, and you just grow up automatically. You grow to fit the situation, and the next thing you're at war, and the next thing you're over a bombing target, and the next thing there's anti-aircraft shells going all around, black puffs going off around here, and up ahead of you, and you just flew through it. You get so immune to danger that you sort of consume it. I have 3,000 hours sitting in this chair. 3,000 hours is a year and a half of work. Yeah, I flew it so much that it was second nature to me. I do remember lining up to takeoff. You had to get one of these windows in line with the line down the runway, and you give it the throttles, and you keep the runway in that window, and with a little bit of brake, keep it going straight. And when you got up to speed, with the rudder you could control it. That's the northern bomb site. I'll be damned. This is a fully equipped bomber. I speak to high school students every now and then, and I tell them things were going to happen to them that was a happening that they never expected. But I said, you got to be prepared to take advantage of them. You got to be prepared.
With so many years between then and now, how does it feel to have this type of outpouring of gratitude from the citizenry of the country?
It brings tears to my eyes right now, just for you to say that. I'm sorry.
That was not a. Well, it's
we're not forgotten.
No. Oh, yeah.
That's our boy Bob, always having the first words, and so he got the first words on this program. Not forgotten, and that's why we're here today, to never forget him. And he'll have the last word and probably a couple words in between, too. So don't worry, you're going to hear from him again. I have some Kleenex distributed on certain. I only had 12 boxes, so you have to share the Kleenex, but other than that, every time I see this video, and you can go out on YouTube, and you just go Bob Vaucher and B29 Doc, and it'll come up on YouTube, and you can watch it at any time. Okay, I think we'll probably have time for the invocation, and Ed Nagel's going to tell us when we're ready for the C-47 flyover. But it's okay. All right. So let me introduce. Let me introduce the Reverend Canon Father Ronald N. Pollock from St. John's, Somerville, St. John's Episcopal Church, where Bob was married on December 15th, 1941, and Father Ron's going to do our invocation.
Almighty and gracious God, we thank you for your presence among us when time stands still, when all that's gone before and all that lies ahead is caught up in the mystery of this moment. Today we gather to celebrate the life of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Robert Bob Vaucher. We give thanks for all those who have gathered here to share and witness on this glorious occasion. We are humbled and yet thrilled to honor and pay tribute to an American hero. We know that combatants bear witness to all aspects of the human condition. It reveals the darkest parts of the human soul while residing side by side with the most exalted characteristics: nobility, honor, valor, and your grace, O God. It is Bob's love of nation, our way of life in America, and our love by those he served with that we celebrate. Those who serve our country defend, sacrifice, bleed, and are willing to die for this unique land, the United States of America. We are grateful that Bob exhibited that kind of sacrifice to those he served alongside of, those who died, who gave their lives for us, then gave their lives to countless citizens who they never knew. We know all too well that too many of those who wear the uniform never get the chance to experience the full cycle of life, the birth and growth of their children. They might not grow old because they chose to stand in our place and face the enemy for us. And yet Bob lived an amazing, meaningful life, full. We give thanks for his beloved wife, Eleanor Huey, married 53 years. We give thanks for each of Bob's beautiful children, Yvonne, Suzanne, and David, and for Brian, Bill, and Greg. We give thanks for his longtime sweetheart, Donna. We give you thanks for each and every of Bob's 102 years. It is not enough to simply read Bob's name on one occasion or just inscribe his name in marble as proof that he lived and that he died. To truly honor our beloved Bob, we acknowledge how and why he fought and served with distinction in the military. Bob is a national treasure. Bob voluntarily put himself in harm's way, prepared to die, so that we may rest secure at home. For those in combat, there is nobility and purpose in their lives, and that is unique, but they don't see themselves as a people apart. They are America's heroes. They are citizens of the United States of America and treasure this land alongside so many others. Bob enjoyed a nice party, oh Lord, you already know. He had a palate for fine wine. Okay, Lord, maybe 2 glasses of wine. He loved his sweets. Okay, maybe, Lord, more than 1. But mostly he enjoyed dear family and friends more than anything else. We have never met a man or woman who wears a United States uniform who wasn't forever grateful and able to count those blessings in a way that is unique to most and to those who wear the uniform. Bob was no different. Bob's faith was palpably real, not only in word but in deed. The uniform that Bob wore made him a better man, a better father, a better employee, a better citizen, and a better follower of the God he loved. The best leaders in battle become that way by being loyal and dutiful. And we know, O God, that Bob served without regard for adulation or unanimous approval either. When we think of American heroes, O God, we think of Bob, someone so beautifully created to live such a beautiful life. We've been gifted by Bob's story. Bob taught us all about leadership by getting out in front of things. It is our duty today and every day to tell the story of our brave men and women like Bob, who sacrificed so much of our fellow citizens. And as I have tried to communicate today, O God, this is not a celebration of Bob alone. We offer our most profound sense of gratitude for his family and friends, his community and church, his civic and professional life. We have more work to do when it comes to honoring such heroes like Bob. Help us to share Bob's story without abandon. We must educate our fellow Americans of what Bob accomplished, along with all those he was honored to serve, what was sacrificed, what they went through. Our survival depends on it. Today, O Lord, we honor an American hero, Lt Col Robert Vaucher. We pray that our gathering may recall the brave and courageous, all valiant seekers after truth, liberty, justice, and peace, the men and women who have made this country strong, for the torch of liberty, which has been lit in this land, and finally for the faith we have inherited in all of its rich variety. May God bless all those who wear the uniform, our allies. And we already know God blessed America because God gave us a fine example in Lieutenant Colonel Bob Vaucher. Amen.
Thanks so much. Beautifully done. Okay, I think we can get one. We're going to go on to our tributes now, and we're going to start with our what I call multi-generational family friends. So these are the children of very dear friends of Bob's. Sam and Mary Alice Barker. Lori Riddell is going to represent the family there, and Fred and Lois Schmeltz, and Lynn is going to represent the Schmeltz family and share some thoughts. And I think we can get through you before the C-47 flies over. Okay, come on up, ladies.
It's a hot summer day, and I am riding in the car down the country road with my parents and sisters. I'm in my bathing suit and so excited. I even have on my brightly colored styrofoam bubble float and bathing cap all ready to go. My father turns right into a driveway, and as the car pulls halfway around the circular drive, I hear the familiar crunch of the gravel. I get out of the car quickly, and as I run up the brick walkway, I see Bob. He claps and rubs his hands together, holding out his arms to give hugs. Hey, Sam, Mary Alice, Susan, Frankie, Lori, great to see you. The pool is perfect. Jump in. Sam and Mary Alice, can I make you a gin and tonic? I am Lori Barker Riddell. I am one of 3 daughters of Sam and Mary Alice Barker, who are lifelong friends of Bob and Eleanor and later Donna. Donna kindly asked me to speak on behalf of my parents and my sister Susan, who is here today, and Frankie, who lives in Alaska. All of our family who loved Bob, our spouses, our children, became aware of his interest in everything and everyone, and like us, were captivated by his stories. I remember as a child the book Hellbirds by Wilbur Morrison, published in 1960, that was on my parents' bookshelf. Occasionally, I would look at the book and the amount of times the name Vaucher was in the book. I knew how important he was to the war and the world, but I knew him as a kind and compassionate person. I don't remember a time without Bob, Eleanor, Yvonne, Suzanne, David, and then Donna. They have always been a big part of my life, our lives, and memories. And of course, you all know Bob was a big presence, and as it has been said many times, a man of extraordinary character, a decorated World War II B-29 aircraft and mission commander, a passionate civic and church leader, a machine tool and metalworking industry innovator, devoted family man, enthusiastic, caring, and compassionate friend to countless young and old. And it is his enthusiasm, love of friends, family, and compassion that I want to address. My parents and Bob and Eleanor first met in Somerville, New Jersey, while living in apartments after World War II and prior to having their first children, Yvonne and Susan. I am certain they had fun from the start, laughter and fun filled, you got it? Oh, thank you. All of their gatherings, trips, and experiences, and we always wanted to be part of that. There were adult trips to the Caribbean, a barge trip in Europe, tennis in the summer, and when my parents moved to Newport, Rhode Island, trips to Rhode Island for tennis, and so on and so forth. And I remember my mother saying that Bob was such a great person to travel with because he was always enthusiastic and always loved an adventure. I remember Sundays at the Vaucher's pool. From what I remember, Bob had built in 1956 because he did not want to make the trip to and from the Jersey Shore in the summer. I think that we learned to swim in that pool and shared Sundays with the Vauchers, Fred, Lois, and Lynn Schmeltz, and various members of the Fritz family. Bob was ever the host. Those days, those times, are etched in my memories. The Vauchers, the Schmeltzes, the Zubecks, and my parents had a gourmet group. In the summer, the men were in charge of the meal. I remember one summer observing the big excitement about the Caesar salad. Of course, when the women were in charge, they worked individually for days or weeks, as Bob reported to us of Eleanor. But on the men's night, they all worked together. Well, Bob was in charge of the Caesar salad, and it was a theatrical event. That evening, as I sat on the other side of the deck at our house, Bob used my mother's huge wooden salad bowl and proceeded to make the salad, commenting with flair and excitement on each and every step in the process. And of course, for Bob's production, the egg had to be coddled, remembers my brother-in-law, John. Although I do not remember if it was the best Caesar salad ever, it was certainly the best production. When we were growing up, it was still the time of children were to be seen and not heard, sort of, but not to Bob. As a child, I was one of the youngest. But Bob always had a smile, a hug, always made me feel special and important. And I know my sisters felt the same way. One particular 4th of July, we heard a loud boom, which the other adults did not appear to notice, and maybe it was the gin and tonics. But not Bob. He piled all of us children into the convertible to go to Duke Island Park to watch the fireworks. I don't think we were wearing seatbelts. Speaking of fireworks, my sister Susan recalls the 4th of July when Bob, our dad, Fred Schmeltz, and maybe some others lit fireworks with the cigars they were smoking off the diving board. My sister Susan said that she and Yvonne were always afraid the police would come. I will forever be grateful to Bob for his friendship and dedication to my parents. Shortly before my dad died in 2002, Bob flew to Newport, Rhode Island to visit him. And as my dad recounted to me, he and Bob agreed they've had a good life. And after my dad died, Bob continued to stay in touch with my mother and get together with her. He called her often, once a month. And as her health declined, she would listen and laugh as he spoke. He continued those calls to me. Once he could not reach her, I relished those calls with Bob. He was always asking, how is John? How are Sam and Emma and Frankie and Susan and John? Never forgetting anyone. I am grateful for his long life and his presence in my life and the lives of so many. Keep on soaring, Bob.
Thank you so much, Lori. That was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So our C-47s, our C-17 is flying over in a few minutes, and so Ed Nagel's going to tell you a little bit about what you're going to be seeing on the plane. So we're gonna stop here, and then we'll pick up Lynn Schmeltz after the flyover of the C-17.
So the Boeing C-17 was made by Boeing, obviously, the same manufacturer that made the Stearman out there, the PT-17. So just some information so you could find it a little more interesting what you're seeing. So the wingspan is 170 feet. Top speed is 590 miles an hour. The range is 6,456 miles. The cargo capacity is 170,900 pounds. It's designed to airdrop 102 paratroopers. Maybe Pico could use it for a skydive one day. The payload capacity is 170,000 pounds. The maximum gross takeoff weight is 585,000 pounds. There was, let's see, it's affectionately known as the Moose. They gave it the nickname the Moose because of the distinct sound it makes when it's refueling. It sounds like a moose, so that's why they call it the Moose. There's 222 C-17s in the United States Air Force, and it's used for design mission is rapid strategic delivery of troops and all types of cargo to main operating bases or directly to forward bases in the deployment area. The aircraft can perform tactical airlift and air drop missions and can transport ambulatory patients during aeromedical evacuations.
Hi, good afternoon. We have a lot to go, so I'm going to start. Family was very important to Bob Vaucher, and his family has always been very important to my family. Our families have been intertwined for generations, my parents, my children, my grandchildren, and me. I have lots of memories from over the decades, and some are now just fragments. As a very young child, I remember Bob as a very warm, gregarious, and outgoing man with wonderfully big hugs. He was always welcoming. He seemed to be unlike any other adult I was acquainted with, perhaps due to his South Texas upbringing with pioneering parents and other life experiences. Bob's first connection with my family was when he and Eleanor Huey were married in December of 1941. My mother, Lois, was matron of honor, and my father, Fred, was best man. My mother always told me that her best friend was Huey, as she called her. She was my godmother, and my parents were godparents to Suzanne. Growing up, I remember painting the fence around the pool to help get things ready for the summer season, spending many weekends playing at the pool in the summer, fireworks by the pool on the 4th of July, the treat of Coke in a plastic glass with ice as refreshment. We never got Coke. Playing dress-up with Suzanne and pretending we were spying on the adults from the second-floor windows. Ice skating on the pool in the winter with Yvonne, Bob, and my father. Helping to pick sour cherries off trees by the pool to make pies and cobblers. Then, of course, there were many years of outdoor events with Bob's famous homemade ice cream, yum, fresh corn and tomatoes, and meat sizzling on the big outdoor grill. Bob was always part of my childhood, which extended to my college years and beyond. He, without hesitation, welcomed my various boyfriends, then husbands, then children, and then the next generation of grandchildren. Bob loved children and was always glad to see us. Bob, Eleanor, and Suzanne came to my wedding to Lar Kaufman at Shelburne Farms in Vermont in August of 1993. At the reception, Laura and Bob started talking and realized that they had graduated from the same very small high school in Sherryland, Texas, in the lower Rio Grande Valley. Now, what are the odds of that connection in Vermont? Sherryland High School was only built in 1921. Bob's class was under 50, and Laura's class was under 200. Bob made my new husband feel very welcome, especially as another transplant from another remote area of Texas. In August of 2015, Bob, Donna, and Yvonne traveled to Cape Cod to join the celebration of my daughter Megan's wedding to Jeff Corey. Bob was the envy on the dance floor at the wedding reception. Over the years, Laura and I would meet Bob and Donna for dinner when we came down from Massachusetts to go to the opera at the Met. After Laura died, I would stay with Bob when I went to the Met. One winter, I remember Suzanne was in town, and we all had long talks by the roaring fireplace. That was a fun evening. It always felt like home to get a big hug from Bob and to see folks I've known all my life. Bob and my father were very good friends and spent time together on the vestry and at Bible study at St. John's Episcopal Church. Bob would often tell me how much he continued to miss my father after he had died. As Lori mentioned, when the spouses were alive, there was a gourmet group made up of Bob and Eleanor, Mary Alice and Sam Barker, Dottie and Bob Zubek, and my parents. This group went on for years. The men were in charge of the summer meal, and often, I think, led by Bob. Most of the meals were elaborate and were a great success, and there was a lot of fun had by all. Personally, I remember cleaning difficult duck pans for my mother and the not-so-well-received Mexican mole turkey dish. The gourmet group shared life together by taking a trip to Europe. The trip included meandering by canal barge, through the picturesque French countryside, enjoying fabulous French food, plus a visit to a town in France that had been liberated from Nazi control by the Army anti-aircraft unit my father commanded during World War II, and also a visit to Bob's relatives in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. It was always wonderful to visit with Bob. My daughter Megan and I were particularly distressed that because of COVID, we were unable to visit Bob this past year. He did see Gavin as a 2-year-old, but only Madison as an infant. As you all know, Bob led a very varied life and wonderful life with many, many friends. My life has been significantly enhanced for knowing him over many years. He is greatly missed.
Hello, everyone. A special hello to Donna and Bob's children, Yvonne, Suzanne, and David. Today is my daughter's move-in day at UNC in Chapel Hill for her freshman year, so I am saddened that I cannot be with you in person today for what I'm sure is an amazing event. Lieutenant Colonel Bob Vaucher was an extraordinary man. I am honored to have this little part today to celebrate his life and highlight some of Bob's contributions to Bridgewater Township. Bob returned home after World War II and settled in this home on Full Hill Road in Bridgewater in 1950. He soon befriended his neighbor across the street, Mr. John Wemple. Mr. Wemple's father was one of the original founders of the Foothill Civic Association in 1925, an organization created to protect the residents' quality of life. From this spot, when Bob first moved to Bridgewater, the association would meet and discuss the future of the township. The Foothill Civic Association had a paramount importance in the way that Bridgewater was developed, preserved, and organized. Mr. Wemple quickly and smartly recruited Bob to join, and it wouldn't be long before Bob stepped up and led the organization. The Foothill Civic Association gave Bob his initial task, leading the fight against a drive-in movie theater. At the time, Bridgewater was mostly a farming town. Bob came to learn that the same movie theater company was having issues back in Texas. So, Bob drilled the movie theater applicant and alerted the town committee to issues that were being hidden. This resulted in a swift denial and Bob's first big win. As Bob told me, after this, the Foothill Civic Association jumped on me and got me mixed up in all sorts of things. As the township kept growing in population and residential development, Bob soon realized that Bridgewater needed its own police department. At the time, Bridgewater was serviced by the state police, but it was evident to Bob that the state police wasn't able to provide the services that the township needed. So, the Foothill Civic Association and Bob took on the task of establishing a Bridgewater Police Department. Through Bob's leadership, the Foothill Civic Association pushed for a public referendum to get public support and approval to create the police department. Not surprising, Bob was successful, and Bridgewater was able to establish its police department in 1965, the same Bridgewater Police Department that exists today. Motivated in part by his children's needs and the great foresight and vision that Bob always had about the town's needs, Bob pushed for Bridgewater to establish a much-needed high school. So Bob decided to go to the State Board of Education to get approval to build a high school. He hit an obstacle. The state would not allow a high school to be built unless Bridgewater was part of a school district. After considering several neighboring towns, Bob settled on Raritan. Again, the Foothill Civic Association and Bob got to work, doing what they did best, fighting for the residents' best interests. Through a public campaign, Bob got public resolutions passed in both Raritan and Bridgewater. The Bridgewater-Raritan Regional School District was now formed. With that, Bob's kids got high school, and so did Bridgewater. Bridgewater's current mayor, Matthew Mensch, Councilman Ring, and I are just a few examples of pupils that benefited by going through the very school system that Bob was instrumental in establishing. Bridgewater's population kept increasing over the years, and the town's needs were changing. During Bob's earlier years, Bridgewater was composed of dairy farms and donkey farms and hayfields. But Bridgewater was needing a more modern and sophisticated government, so Bob went to Rutgers University's political science department to discuss a town that he described as a sleepy little town that was growing. Bridgewater's government needed a better structure. Working with Rutgers, Bob came back with a proposal for a new form of government, the Faulkner's Act's mayor-council form of government. This was controversial at the time, with most of the then town committee members opposing it. Bob led the Foothill Civic Association in a movement to get a referendum passed. They succeeded with more than enough votes, and Bridgewater's government structure was changed to the system we now use today. Several decades ago, there was a developer that sold off small lots, mostly to city folks looking for a future place in then urban Bridgewater. However, over the years, many of those lots were abandoned, and real estate taxes left delinquent for many, many years. Bob worked on the framing and passing of a state law that gave the township the ability to foreclose on long-term delinquent tax properties. Many of those properties were here, and as a result of those tax sales, the location existed for the Bridgewater Commons Mall. Bob was a strong advocate for the creation of Bridgewater's sewer system. He worked closely in devising the financial structure that made the system viable. Bob was a regular participant during Bridgewater Master Plan revisions since 1960. His fingerprints are in our zoning laws and planning initiatives, which have focused on protecting the residents' quality of life, a key objective of the Foothill Civic Association. When the 287 project was planned to go through Bridgewater, Bob was selected to go to the state to review the plans and provide input. Bob immediately had the concern that the state's plan would cut through residents' home in the community that is now Hobstown. Bob was concerned that the highway would displace what was, at the time, a Black American lower-income community, and so he asked the state to push the highway plan further west before looping north. Bob's knowledge and concern and the respect he was given resulted in residents not losing their homes and saved an entire community from being displaced. The Raritan Valley Community College exists today because of Bob's vision and persuasion. In the 1960s, the Somerset County freeholders appointed Bob to a 6-person committee to explore the possibility of building a community college right here in Somerset County. Bob traveled to Hartford and Long Island to look at community colleges already operating. He returned feeling very positive about the opportunities that a community college could bring to the local community. However, others didn't share his view. The committee was split 3-3. Coincidentally, or likely through Bob's power of persuasion, the opposing chairwoman didn't show up to vote, and the committee passed the recommendation by a 3-2 vote. Bob also led the efforts to support and build the Votech Institute in Bridgewater. Both locations of the Raritan Valley Community College and Votech were selected with Bob's influence. Over the years, RVCC has educated thousands and thousands of local residents since its inception in 1965. The Wimple property, where the Foothill Civic Association first took hold before moving to Bob's house, is now open space thanks to the efforts of Bob Vaucher. Currently named the Vaucher Revolutionary Preserve, Bob was instrumental in this land's permanent preservation as open space. When the opportunity presented itself, at 99 years of age, he mobilized his friends, reached out to preservation groups, and lobbied local politicians to preserve this parcel of land. Through the hard work of Bob and others he mobilized, public donations were received, and through a public, private, and government partnership, the then Wimple property was finally restored to its open space glory. The history of this parcel of land is extraordinary, from its role in the Revolutionary War to the genesis of the Foothill Civic Association to Bob Vaucher. This land has passed on a legacy of courage, civic duty, and civil responsibility. From 1950 until his passing early this year, Bob was relentless at speaking out against overdevelopment, alerting the community when its government representatives strayed from doing what was right, executing on his vision for a better township, and never wavering from protecting Bridgewater's quality of life. I have no doubt that because of Bob Vaucher, his vision, his drive, his dedication, and his passion, Bridgewater developed with constraints, maintained its character, and is the wonderful place we all call home today. Without Bob, Bridgewater would likely be a very different place. We are all better off because Bob was there, continuously fighting against overdevelopment and making sure that Bridgewater always prioritized its quality of life. I had the honor and privilege of knowing Bob for about 20 years, and I've been lucky to call Bridgewater home since 1978. Bob was a tremendous advocate for the residents, and he had a vision of the township that had a better government, safer neighborhoods, and great education. Just think about this for a moment. Bridgewater's form of government, our police department, and the school system are all here today because of the hard work, vision, dedication, and leadership of Bob Vaucher. I have no doubt that no one has contributed more towards what Bridgewater is today than Bob Vaucher. Lt Col Thomas Robert Vaucher is a national war hero, an aviation pioneer, a church leader, a dedicated family man, a community visionary, and a Bridgewater treasure. Thank you, Donna, for giving me this opportunity and for being the voice you are for Bob's legacy. God bless you all, and God bless America.
Tim, would you like to say a few words? Councilman Tim Ring. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. So I've listened to some of these speeches. First of all, I'm very honored to be here. I had the pleasure of knowing Bob only for about 3 years, the last 3 years of his life. And I know many folks here today knew Bob much longer than me. But those 3 years were ones that I cherished and enjoyed all the time sitting and talking to Bob. There was never a boring conversation with Bob whatsoever. Donna asked me if I could keep my comments to 3 to 5 minutes, and I sit down and I start trying to write out some comments, and the hard part is you start going down one avenue, and all of a sudden you're 3 to 5 minutes on one topic before you can get to the next one. But as I said, I first met Bob back in 2018. My wife and I were running for county committee in Bridgewater, and we sat down, we went to Bob's house and knocked on the door. And I'll be honest with you, we thought it was going to be about a 5-minute conversation. Yes, as you can imagine, I think about an hour and a half later, we left Bob's house. And I felt like we were friends for life after having met him the first time back in 2018. And back in 2019, I ended up finding myself somehow on a ticket to run for town council in Bridgewater. And I knocked at Bob's house one day, and he wasn't home, and I left a little note on his door, and he called me up, and he said, "If you stop to get my vote, you have nothing to worry about. I wholeheartedly support you." And from that, I have to say it really took off. This is a gentleman who took a very active role at 100 years old in politics. This is a gentleman who went out and went to events. I remember one event we were at, and he was sitting there, and he got up when an event just like this with a podium and a microphone, and he got up when someone sat down and just walked up to the microphone and started talking. He wasn't invited, but he was welcome. And he went on about how important he felt that election was, and it was quite interesting. And I heard Father Ron earlier talk about how Bob enjoyed a glass or two of wine. I remember sitting in his house. He was very involved in our campaign and would take the time to sit and talk to us about different things. And I remember one night sitting in his house talking to him with a couple other people, and we got done. As the host he always was, he had to have a little plate of cheese and stuff for us, and we're taking it in the kitchen, and he jokingly made a comment not to look under the kitchen sink because that's where the red wine was, and apparently he had given it up for Lent. So those are the things you remember. Even during our campaign on a Saturday morning at 100 years old, Bob would drive down to the campaign headquarters and just hang out and talk to you and meet people, and truly was a positive light on our campaign, which I will always remember. After having got elected to the town council, was very honored last year to partner with Linda Mead from DNR Greenway Land Trust. I'm sure many of you know the story about the Wimple property and Bob's efforts, along with Brendan Burns and Dave Stempian, who are here to preserve that property. And last year we were fortunate to take the action to rename the Wimple property the Vaucher Revolutionary Preserve. And thanks to thanks to a strong partnership with DNR Greenway Trust, there's a sign now that sits diagonally across the street from Bob's house, forever marking that the Vaucher Revolutionary War Preserve. So I thank DNR for that. We heard Bob earlier in the video, very tear-eyed because people remember what he did. And I can stand here, while I've only known Bob for 3 years, Bob was a huge, huge factor in the foundation of Bridgewater and where we are today, and continued right up to the bitter end. I was fortunate to see Bob earlier this year with Jeff Foose, who's sitting in the back of the room, and we're talking to Bob, and Jeff shared that he had recently taken over as the chairman for the Township Zoning Board. And even in Bob's final days, he was quite happy. He kind of pumped his fist and said yay, and really cheered on Jeff. So yes, Bob, you're not forgotten, and you never will be. So thank you, Bob.
So this is a photo at Jeff Foose's house where they had a birthday party for him of all the civic people, the ones that could make it that night, and for his 100th birthday. One of 12 cakes that Bob blew out during that 100th birthday. So let's move on. So again, another facet of Bob's life is this Foothill neighbors, his neighbors on Foothill Road. Bob just dropped in on these neighbors, and he would always want me to drop in with them. I said, you don't just drop in on people anymore. And he said, oh, he does. And he dropped in on these neighbors regularly, and they can attest to that. So representing is Mike Ryan, who is, he'll tell you his story in relationship with Bob, and then Billy Dwyer as well. We still call you Billy. Sorry. Sorry, Captain. Okay, Mike?
Is my voice coming across as kind of raspy? I think I picked up a bit of an allergy here from the grass. It has nothing to do with my feelings about Bob. I'll pick it up. All right, can we raise it? Are we good now? I started to write some notes, and I kept changing them constantly, so now I have this mess here, which I'll try to go through. So often in life, we have unintended consequences. Sometimes they're serendipitous. Almost 50 years ago, we moved onto Foothill Road, and serendipitously, the Vaucher family lived right a catty corner from us. So over those decades, I got to know Bob very well as a mentor and a friend. And Donna said, you have 5 minutes. I said, Donna, that's like asking me to build a house in one day. So I'm just going to build the front door. This door is Bob. It's solid, old timber. Skilled craftsmen had cut it and planed it, sanded to near perfection. It was joined by master carpenters, old-fashioned way with mortise, tenon, and glue. It's bright white like Bob's smile. And appropriate for the colonel, there's a lot of brass up there. There's a brass doorknob, there's a brass handle, and there are brass hinges, which, again, appropriate for Bob, are very squeaky. To paraphrase the old expression, it's the squeaky hinge gets the oil. Bob was the squeaky hinge in Bridgewater. He got things done. When he saw that something was not right or there needed to be an improvement, Bob was out there making sure it got done. Now, he was also, as you know, very courageous. And we didn't really understand the degree until one day Ann, my wife, said, you know, this afternoon a plane came over the house. It was very low, making a lot of noise. She said, and as Bob would do, he'd just stop in, because we were happy with Bob just stopping by unannounced. And Ann said, Bob, did you hear that crazy plane go over the house today? He said, yeah, it was me. She said, what were you doing? He said, a victory roll. I told Eleanor to stand out in the driveway and I'd come over and do a victory roll celebrating my 50th year of having a license to fly. He didn't slow down any. A few years later, in his 90s, he told us there's a hill, Newman's Lane, there in Bridgewater. Very steep, goes down to the valley. Bob told us he wanted to find out what would happen if he didn't put his foot on the brake. Well, he found out two things. Number one, you can hit almost 80 miles an hour. And two, there are policemen down there. Fortunately for him, everybody in town knew who Bob was, so he got a finger wag and that was it. And of course, anybody who ever drove out of Bob's driveway knows what courage is. He refused to get the hedges trimmed so you couldn't see. There's a dip in the road to the left where cars get hidden. But on top of that, in his 90s, I said to Bob, Bob, isn't this really too dangerous? He says, no, I just listen for the oncoming traffic. I said, Bob, you can't hear me without your hearing aid. So besides courageous, he was a very lucky man. He was also a contradiction. He was, in many ways, a progressive. He was very much into early aviation. He developed new concepts for aviation and for his engineering company. In Bridgewater, he helped create, and it's a shame we don't have a chance to see this film that Pedroso had put together, everything from new schools to roads and sewers to realigning 287 so it wasn't in the middle of Bridgewater. And he always had a new car. He was very progressive. Bob had to have a new car. But in many ways, he was a conservative. He was a staunch Republican conservative. He conserved his money. He never updated his house. He complained about neighbors using weed control and cutting their lawn. He thought that was just terrible because he grew up on a farm and that's how it should look. And of course, he never put in any asphalt on that driveway, so when you did try to get out, your wheels are spinning on the gravel. So Bob was pretty much a warrior. When we were active in politics, he was called the commander, and his headquarters was the house right there on Foothill Road. That was the headquarters for the political movement. But he really had a soft side, too. As other people have mentioned, he really loved children. He taught Bible school. And I saw his sensitive side, something he tried to keep back. Rondi was a young man who did yard work for both of us. And at 32, Rondi got cancer and died. Bob came to the funeral carrying flowers from the garden that Rondi used to help take care of. Put the flowers there and wiped a tear as he walked away. So this was the sensitive side of Bob that he didn't let out too often. And he said about not being forgotten, it's not just the people who knew him who won't forget him. I was at the Reading Air Show one year with him, and there was a B-29. Underneath, the doors were open so you could look up in there. So I'm standing there with Bob, and he's explaining all about the apparatus in the B-29. And a crowd began to come around. And I looked at the faces of these young people, and you would have thought that God was standing there. They could not, but they wanted to reach out and touch him. They knew what he had done. So, in many ways, like that door, he was solid, he was reliable, and he was sensitive. And he was the kind of man that many of us wish we were.
Okay, Billy Dwyer, another Foothill neighbor, and he's going to represent the family and how much Lieutenant Colonel Vaucher meant to him growing up.
Absolutely. So like Mr. Ryan, I took lots of notes and practiced. I drove up this morning from Washington, D.C., and I was practicing on the phone with my wife. Oh, there go my notes. It never quite came that way out twice. That's right, he did. He would. So it's interesting. My parents, Larry and Elaine Dwyer, are sitting over there. They moved to Foothill Road in 1968, and I think until recently you were still the new kids on the block, I want to say. And my dad tells a story of when they moved in. Bob inviting him. I still say Mr. Vaucher, so it's hard for me to say Bob. But Mr. Vaucher invited him over to the kids to swim in the pool. And at that time, there were only 3 kids, and we'll go into there are 6 of us now and 13 grandchildren, and we all got to know Mr. Vaucher well. But Dad went on 5 years later to use the same pool builder to put his pool in. And on that story about flybys, Bob used to fly by the house and then stop by and tell Dad, hey, your pool's green, you need to add chlorine to it. So I'm Bill Dwyer, the 5th of 6 kids, so I see a lot of familiar names from Foothill Road and know that there are 6 of us. So any of those old Halloween stories of Mischief Night, it wasn't me. It was probably my brothers, Larry or Ed, taking care of business. So let me just start out by saying that many of you know Mr. Vaucher as a war hero and a champion and ambassador of Foothill Road, but I just knew him as my next door neighbor. So I was born in 1972. So growing up, I spent my summers admiring how well the yard was kept. And I always, even today, my family's in Florida, and I still model my yard after how great David did his, and just trying to keep it, the meticulous nature of how you trim your hedges and keep your lawn mowed is something I've always kept with me. But that self-sacrifice that he showed, and through the years, for me personally, it really meant a lot. So he was a great neighbor, and starting out, I'll kind of work through the decades real quickly, but in the 60s and 70s, if those who've been to the Vaucher's house, there still is, a large pine tree that sits, I want to say it's a pine tree, that sits between the house and the garage, and I don't know, it might have been the firehouse, or somebody would come by and string lights on that tree. And Mr. Vaucher would call our house and say it was Santa Claus, and say, come to the window and look at this. And that magic, I've taken with me today with my children, but that's a great memory that we'll always have. When I was growing up, I'd often go over and shovel snow, and I think I still have a few outstanding invoices, by the way, and I'll deliver those after. But I would work for hours, and those who've been there, that's a big driveway, right? But my older brother, Larry, he's about 10 years older than me, he had a plow. So I'd be about 3/4, maybe last through, and he'd come through in 5 minutes and clear the rest out, and guess who got paid? It wasn't me. So, and I can remember being 16 years old, going to my first Letterman's dinner when I was at St. Peter's Prep, and walking over and asking Mr. Vaucher how to tie a bow tie. And he taught me how to tie a bow tie. And I think I still remember today. But he's been a part of so many weddings and celebrations and anniversaries in my family. It's really tough to count. But the two that mean the most to me was my wedding. He came up, Aaron and I, my wife, were married at Mount Holyoke College in 1997. And that meant a lot. We invited Mr. Vaucher up, and it meant a lot for those who know his history and how he met Eleanor up there when he was at Hanscom and she was at Smith. And he took time the morning of our wedding, and we just probably talked for about 20, 30 minutes about that. And it meant a lot to me to know that history. And as someone who chose a life of service, I think it was partially based on my father, who was a United States Marine, and Bob Vaucher. Knowing what that service meant to him, and knowing how much he took that with him and kind of made everyone else's life special out of that self-sacrifice. When we moved back to New Jersey, when I attended law school at Rutgers, my wife taught up in Bernardsville, and she taught at the Bedwell School. And sure enough, we asked Mr. Vaucher to come up on Veterans Day and speak to the kids, and he was more than eager to do it. And as Mr. Ryan so eloquently said, the kids were riveted, like nothing that teachers had ever seen before. They could never get the attention that he could get, and it was without a movie. It was just a book, and it was just stories, and it still touches us today. I can remember just a few years ago when we were stationed in Hawaii. We lived on Makalapa, which is U.S. Pacific Fleet headquarters, and we would talk. And over the years, we've always exchanged cards and Christmas cards, and we'd talk whenever we'd come back to town. But we had asked, one of the girls had a project. I have twins, Mary and Martha, and they had a school project, and it was on the 1940s. And who did we call? We called up Mr. Vaucher. And he proceeded to have a half an hour, 45-minute FaceTime conversation about it with my girls. And it meant a lot to us. And I I wish I had that picture with me today, but it meant a lot to us to see that. So I think what this means to me today, and honored to be here, is through the years I've lived in a lot of places, and my kids have lived in a lot of different places, but they've always been able to go home to Foothill Road. And the reason why Foothill Road is the way it is today, and it hasn't changed, is because the tireless effort and dedication of Bob Vaucher. And so I'll forever be grateful as a neighbor, as a friend, and as a father of my kids to always give that to them, and they have that today. So on behalf of the Dwyer family, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Vaucher family. Thank you, Donna, for having this today.
I've heard the bow tie story, and I still can't believe it. That's fabulous. Okay, we're going to move on to another aspect of Bob's life, aviation, a big aspect, and we got that in two segments. Ed Nagel's going to kind of come up, and then Steve Shapiro are going to say a few words in terms of a couple of stories with regards to Bob and his aviation experience with them.
Thank you. So I started flying here at Solberg 47 years ago, and shortly thereafter, through my wife Susie, I got to meet Bob. So I'd known him a long time. Didn't really spend a lot of time with him, didn't really know him in a lot of the ways that you all know him as neighbors and congregants and so on and so forth, but mostly through aviation. So we took a liking to each other because we both like airplanes and we both appreciate World War II aircraft. So I'm going to share with you a mission I had with Bob when he was 90. I took him up in my T6 out there, the SNJ, and it was a very special mission. It was in May of '08, and he was 90 then, so we needed a ladder to get him in, a ladder to get him out, but he was all in no matter what. He wanted to go. So we get going, and we get up and climbing. It was a beautiful day, actually much nicer than today. And all of a sudden, I hear guys chattering on the radio. They're flying formation. I think it could have been it wasn't the Jersey Jerks because we didn't exist back then, but it could have been the Six of Diamonds. A couple of those guys were up flying, so I asked them if we could join up. So we did. We flew. I asked Bob. I said, "Are you up for some formation?" "Oh, yeah." So we start flying formation, and we change positions, and, Bob's loving it. He hasn't done that in 60 years, right, since he got out of the service, a long time ago. So he's loving that, and I think I did pretty good. I didn't scare him. He didn't scream. He didn't yell at me or anything like that, so that was all good. And then when we finished that, I said, "Bob, how'd you like to have a go flying a plane?" "Oh, yeah." So he takes the stick, and I've had a lot of passengers go with me and pilots too. But I have to say that, Bob was very unique in that it's like he just finished the training. He was spot on altitude. He would turn, climb, descend. The ball was centered. He was totally coordinated. You could tell that this man could fly. He obviously did a lot of flying. So I was very impressed with that. So now we're probably 40 minutes into the flight, and we're 20, 30 miles away. I said, "Bob, I think we're going to head back now." "Okay." And we still had some pretty good altitude, 3,000, 4,000 feet. I said, "Bob, are you up for a victory roll?" "Oh, yeah." "Yeah, let's do that, Ed." I said, "Okay." So now I dive down, I get the speed, and we get upside down, and all of a sudden, I hear a scream, "Yippee!" He screams. What did I do wrong? He was so ecstatic from just going upside down and doing that roll. It was great. Now we get back and land, and we had a great mission. He had a great ride. He got to fly the plane, formation, did the roll, all this other stuff, and shut the plane down and get out. We have the ladder. We're going to get him out of the plane. And we go to get him out of the plane. Niagara Falls. He's crying like a baby. He was so moved by the experience that he couldn't contain himself. So it's quite a memory.
His last combat mission, as I mentioned, was on September 2nd, 1945, and that was the show of force over the USS Missouri. And on that flight, his commander said, "Vaucher, this is one target you better not miss. Well, of course, he didn't. Just as MacArthur was signing the surrender documents, he said, "Where are the bombers?" And he looked up, and once you know it, there's Bob, right on time, precisely, 9:17 in the morning. And then 525 B-29s after him. His last mission, as you saw in the video, was to serve as the honorary air boss for the Arsenal of Democracy this past year in 2020. And he was able to fly one more time in dock, as you saw, after flying many times over the years in Fifi. Overall, he flew approximately 40 different types of aircraft. He flew a total of 117 missions all over the world: Panama, Guatemala, Ecuador, Peru, India, China, and then the South Pacific on Tinian. He also had 26 missions in the B-29 over the Himalayas. That was referred to as flying over the hump. And what they had to do was they couldn't reach Japan from India, and at the time we didn't have any bases closer to Japan. So they would have the B-29s in India. They would fly to a base in China. They'd fly the bombs in, then they'd go back, they'd fly more fuel in, they'd load up in China, and then they'd launch from China to attack Japan. And he was on the first mission of a B-29 to attack Japan, and that was in June of '44. He's got many commendations, too many to name, but he has 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, and he was awarded a set of wings from Chiang Kai-shek, which he wore very proudly on his sport coat for the rest of his life. So a few of the firsts that he accomplished: he introduced the first radar-equipped bomber into combat in April 1942. That was on his patrols in Panama. Again, he was the first pilot to deliver a B-29 to the Army Air Corps. And also, let the plane go by. Definitely. He flew the longest mission of World War II. It was a 4,000-mile round-trip mission from India to Sumatra. They were in the air for nearly 19 hours. Very accomplished, as you've all heard. And his passion for aviation never waned. He continued to fly for 62 years. He was presented with the FAA Master Pilot Award, which honors more than 50 years of safe flying. So that's quite an honor to receive that. He was elected to the New Jersey Aviation Hall of Fame in 2013. And as we've heard how much he served his community, he also served the aviation community, being a member of the New Jersey Department of Transportation Aviation Advisory Board, and then a member of the Blue Skies Flying Club here at Solberg. For me, the flight back in 2012 was the start of a really wonderful friendship with Bob, and not just with me, but our whole family. My dad was also a World War II veteran. He was a pilot, but not in the war. The only flying he did during the war was in the back of a glider. He flew into southern France, became a pilot afterwards. And we shared many nice dinners with Bob and Donna and my parents, sharing stories, and it's a time that we cherished together. And one last story that I'd like to share. I know I was asked to talk about aviation, but we've all heard a few of Bob's driving stories. Of course, I have one too. So one night at our QB meeting, I'm talking to Bob, and usually Ed would drive Bob to the meeting, and I didn't see Ed, so I asked Bob, I said, "Did you come with Ed tonight?" He said, "Oh no, Ed wasn't able to make it. I drove myself." And I'm thinking, oh, that's kind of interesting. Then he looks at me and goes, "But I shouldn't drive at night." I said, "No, Bob, you shouldn't." At the time, he was 99. And so from then I said, "Bob, if you ever need a ride, just give me a call. I'm more than happy to pick you up and drive you home." And so whenever Ed wasn't available, that honor fell to me, and I just cherished those drives. And they were all too short from the Bridgewater Manor back to his home, but it was a lot of fun. And of course, he would tell great stories in that short time, never long enough, of course. And I just feel very fortunate, very grateful to be able to call Bob a friend and a mentor. As we all know, he had an easygoing demeanor, a wonderful sense of humor, and he could keep people captivated as long as he would speak. And we know that would often go on for a while, and it was always worth every minute of it. What I learned from him is he preached the lessons of be prepared and to take advantage of opportunities when they presented themselves. And that's something that Bob demonstrated throughout his life. And it's, I think, a great lesson that all of us can take away from Bob. and the indelible mark that he left on everyone that knew him. Thank you.
Great aviation stories. There we go. Thank you so much, Ed and Steve. So many of you may not know, July was the 80th anniversary of Solberg Airport. Congratulations. And so I promised that you were going to hear from Bob again. So we're going to hear from Bob in terms of his experience with Solberg Airport back in 1941, and then Susie Solberg-Nagel is going to come up and say a few words.
Elda and I started dating. When she graduated from Smith in June of 1941, she returned home to Somerville, New Jersey. She would often come to Westover, and we would enjoy summer outings at the so-called New England beaches. We didn't care if they were rocky because we were in love. Cross-country flying and the PT trainer was encouraged as part of our training, so I would fly to Newark, New Jersey Airport on weekends to see her. I learned about Solberg Airport near Somerville and that Thor Solberg was training Norwegian pilots. I introduced myself to Thor, and he said he would welcome military use of the airport. From then on, I would fly to Solberg on courting missions to court my girl in Somerville. So I could say that I flew the first warbird into Solberg, and I have a photo to prove it.
Susie is the youngest child of Thor Solberg.
Hello, everyone. Solberg, as Donna just told you, Solberg Airport was founded over 80 years ago by my father, the late Thor Solberg Sr. My father was born in Norway on a farm, along with 5 brothers and sisters. My father decided not to go into the family carpentry business. Instead, he raced motorcycles in Europe and traveled to Germany to learn to fly. In 1925, he came to the United States and opened a print shop in Brooklyn. 5 years later, which was very important to my father, he became an American citizen. In 1932, my father made his first attempt to cross the Atlantic Ocean, doing the Leif Erikson route in reverse. He was going to fly to Canada, Newfoundland, Greenland, Iceland, and eventually to Norway. Unfortunately, the flight was terminated due to a forced landing in the Bay of Fundy because of carpenter ice. 3 years later, in 1935, he made his second attempt. This time he decided to do it in an amphibian called the Loning. He departed from the same field, Floyd Bennett Field, on July 18th and arrived in Norway on August 16th. In the late 1930s, he started purchasing farmland near Lightfield Road. Lightfield Road is the road parallel to Thor Solberg Road. In the 1920s, Lightfield Road was used as an emergency landing strip between Newark and Allentown, so it was known as an aviation spot. In 1941, Readington Township recognized Solberg Airport as a commercial airport. Sometime after that, my mother, who was living in Brooklyn, read in the newspaper about my father and the airport. And she told my friends, her friends, she said, "I'm going to marry that guy." And she came out under the premise of learning how to fly and ended up with a marriage license. During World War II, Solberg Airport, like all the airports in New Jersey, were closed for security reasons. Tor and Lorraine moved to Massachusetts, where my father trained over 5,000 pilots without a single incident. In 1948, in anticipation of serving the aviation community, Lorraine and Tor had a big hangar built, which is still standing today. That's down there, and we call it the big hangar because it's big. In 1958, the FAA recognized the key location of Solberg Airport and asked my parents about establishing a VORTAC on the airport. Always conscious of the value of getting your name out there, my father gave permission on one condition, that the vortex be named Solberg. Typically, the FAA names the vortex after the town, but they made the exception, and so it's called the Solberg Vortex. That's the bowling pin out there, if you look. Little bowling pin with the red and white checkered, that's it. Tor Solberg and his wife, Lorraine, continued amassing property, and at one time owned 1,400 acres, extending intermittently between here and Route 22. And this land was purchased through mortgages. They didn't have money, they just mortgaged. So when Tor and Lorraine died, the IRS and the New Jersey wanted their share of the pie. So that was a huge financial burden to us, the inheritance taxes. My brother, my sister, and I eventually got out of debt by preserving the integrity of the existing 700 acres and selling the peripheral land. In 1983, two fellows by the name of Bill Lewis and Denny Fleck approached the airport about holding a hot air balloon festival. 38 years later, Solberg continues to hold what is now the largest hot air musical festival and is now promoted by Howard Freeman, John Korff, and Ken Stotz. That's very nice of them. The FAA funded a master plan study and did an airport layout plan in 1998 that showed Solberg Airport with a primary runway in stage 1 of having 4,300 feet and stage 2 having 4,890 feet. Readington did not like that, and they started to either threaten or start their eminent domain action. In 2006, Readington took fee simple title to 624 acres of our airport on the premise of open space. We challenged them in court, and fee simple title was eventually returned to the Solbergs in 2019. Sadly, my brother passed away in December of 2017 before this court win. Today, the airport is moving forward under the direction of the second and third generation of Solberg naval families. There's also a fourth generation, thanks to my nephews. A complete rehabilitation of the 35 feet of runway 422 with lighting and PAPI lights is planned this fall. We also have 2 crosswind runways. I want to thank you very much for coming today to celebrate the life of my friend, Bob Vaucher. Bob Vaucher met my parents when he flew into Solberg at the onset of World War II, as you know, to court his future wife, Eleanor. After World War II, Bob continued to come to the airport and always offered help and assistance in anything he could do. And I had personally the honor to serve with Bob on the New Jersey Aviation Council at the pleasure of the Commissioner of Transportation. Bob will be missed.
So we'd like to hear from the best of the Vaucher family.
First off, I want to reiterate Donna in thanking everyone for making the effort to be here today, especially the Warbirds who flew in from far and wide and everyone who's spoken so beautifully and thoughtfully about my father. I'm going to skip some things because I know we're going long, and Yvonne's going to do some other thank yous after I finish. But I especially do want to thank Donna for being the force behind this event. I feel very sure in saying that this would not have happened today in this way without you. And your love for Dad, your care for him, your loyalty to him, even when the going got tough and not much fun towards the end, your advocacy for his interest has always been truly impressive. And I also want to thank my sisters. Dad would often comment that Mom would be so proud that her children were here for dear old Dad, as he would put it. Well, we were a team, a small team to be sure, with unfortunately no next generational backup. So our roles in helping him were all important, especially in this very complicated last year. My sisters showed amazing fortitude, masked up, visored up, tested again and again. They flew back and forth across the country, once on literally a few hours' notice when things went wrong, here for weeks and months at a time, apart from their very understanding mates, Their regular day-to-day lives completely disrupted, all to help make sure that Dad was as comfortable and cared for as possible. There's not the time, or even if there was the time, I couldn't find adequate words to fully do my father justice. So much has been said about his heroics during World War II and his many civic accomplishments later on. Indeed, he was many different things to many different people and groups of people. But to me and Suzanne and Yvonne, of course, he was our father. Dad to Suzanne and me, Papa to Yvonne. Collectively, incredibly, and blessedly, our experience with Dad encompassed over 76 years. Yvonne was born in 1944 while Dad was overseas. With luck and great skill, he lived to see her for the first time almost a year later. At that point, he, born and raised on a citrus ranch to the most southern tip of Texas, was thrust quite literally into another world, the very tight-knit society of Somerville, New Jersey, thick with the alliances and lifelong friendships that small towns generate. In thinking about this, I regret not asking him more about that transition to life here, but it couldn't have been all that easy, not only because his upbringing had been so different, but more significantly because of what he had just been through. Without any of the support networks and organizations that exist today for veterans, he and so many others fortunately had the ability to process the insanity and trauma as best they could and move forward into civilian life. They just had to get on with it, buying a house, having kids, making some money, catching up on the 5 years of life that had been lost to the war. Yvonne had 9 years as an only child in the late 40s and early 50s. Why it took 9 years, I don't exactly know, but 9 years later, Suzanne was born. 3 years later, in 1956, I came along. When Yvonne describes her early growing up years with Mom and Dad, I don't much recognize them. Bridgewater was a rural place when they moved up from Somerville in 1949. Gravel roads led off Foothill up onto the mountain. Cows grazed in the field behind our house. It all seemed quite idyllic. But by the mid-60s, when I was 10 years old, Yvonne was well off to college and married, and the status quos of the 1950s were being challenged by the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, rock and roll, and a whole lot more. This was not an easy time to be raising kids, especially kids who were prone to challenge various opinions of their quite opinionated father. Truth be told, he was not always happy with us. We were not always happy with him. But amidst all that social upheaval, there was work to be done. You know, after Dad died, someone remarked to me that there were folks who thought he had never worked. I suppose for some that could have been a plausible assumption, given that he lived so long and acquired so many new friends in the last 25 post-work years of his life. But for me, my father's work was at the center of our lives growing up. He had formed a new business around 1961, and during that decade and beyond, he was focusing on establishing it and making it a success. Around the dinner table, the conversation was often about his business, the big order he had gotten, the big order that slipped away, economic downturns, upturns. He traveled constantly, mostly to the Midwest, to sell his machine line to various companies. One of my strongest memories is the sight of his brown American Tourister suitcase, probably still in the far reaches of our cellar, by the way, spread open in his bedroom on a Sunday night, smelling a little of his Jockey Club cologne, Dad packing for another trip. When he got back, there were always stories. If it was a convention week in Chicago, each night was detailed. Who he went to dinner with, where they went to dinner, the show they saw, the view of the lake from his hotel window. I loved hearing all that stuff. Always there was some little souvenir from the trip, a toy John Deere tractor from his visit to the plant, a postcard of Wrigley Field. He was out there in the big world, and then he brought that all home, shared it, and transferred his excitement and curiosity about it to us. However, the through line, the line that wove its way through all these years and decades, was Dad's civic engagement. I think he came to occupy an interesting and fairly unusual piece of turf in that regard. Although he could be political and partisan, campaigned for and gave his support to various politicians over the years, he himself never aspired to elective office. That was a little too confining and inside for him. Now, don't get me wrong, he liked knowing what was going on and having an inside track, and over the years, sometimes he did and sometimes he didn't have an inside track. But in his heart, he knew he didn't belong completely inside, that was not where he was most effective. He respected the role of governance, believed in the process, understood that to get things done, you needed allies on the inside, but he would stay on the outside with eyes wide open. Now, that did mean that along the way, a few people ended up not liking him very much, but he was strong enough and confident enough in his beliefs to withstand the fire. He wasn't afraid of making a few enemies if they were what he considered the right enemies. And in reality, most of what he did, most of what he got passionate about wasn't partisan at all, at least in a traditional political sense. Much of it was focused on addressing grassroots community issues that cross party lines. A township high school, a highway routed through your neighborhood, open space, overdevelopment, the list goes on. And let me just also say that nothing he did community-wise ever benefited him financially. I know that for sure. In this last quarter plus 2 years of his life, the stories Dad told got longer and more retrospective. Many of them were about his experiences during World War II. Many were long and led to side stories, a little background, as he would put it, before at some point returning to the main story or being directed back to the main story. I think it's safe to say that there are other people under this tent that were better listeners, better audiences. David, are you paying attention? Yes, Dad, I can do two things at once. Yvonne, where are you going? I need to check on what's in the oven. You know, we don't have a cook here. Can you hear me in there? Yes. Now, where are you going? The fire's going out. I need to put another log on. But the bottom line is that we did hear, and we came to understand that the experiences he was relating, many of which I, and I think Suzanne, had not heard while growing up, were so profound and so deeply etched in his mind that no detail could be lost to the fog of years or old age. He was not forgetting those 5 historic years. Now, as some of you here know, I wasn't really my father's son in any obvious sense. At least superficially, we didn't share similar personalities or many of the same interests. I'm sure he would have liked it to be different, but we didn't let that derail our relationship. My mother started having serious health issues in the mid-1980s. Through all her trials and tribulations, my father was the most amazing husband and support to her, an absolute rock and a wonderful example to us. After she died in 1994, Dad and I were faced with new terms between us. No longer could or would it be buffered and filtered through her. I didn't know exactly how we would make our way together, but we made our way, we did, and these later years were a beautiful gift of time together that I feel so lucky to have had. Much of that time was holidays and summer weeks with the whole family that Dad so looked forward to, but also there were the quiet weekends when it was just the two of us at home on a Sunday afternoon, or maybe accompanying him to one of his many doctor's appointments. He got to 102, but let me tell you, he didn't get there without a lot of doctor's appointments. Anyway, he had spent so much of his life taking care of us that it felt good to be able to take care of him a little bit. You know, life full circle. As 90 turned into 95, 95 incredibly turned into 100, no one was taking one moment of his life for granted. Well, maybe just a little bit, because until the last 8 months of his life, Dad was still so full of life. I recently came across a picture of him dated May 3rd, 2020, only a year and 3 months ago. He was halfway through his 102nd year. It was a Sunday afternoon, middle of the first COVID lockdown. Dad had driven himself up to the house on Foothill to do his own thing on a Saturday afternoon. At some point, Donna, out and about, decided to stop by and check up on him. She walked in to find him standing at the kitchen counter with a Dr. Pepper and an open pint of Haagen-Dazs chocolate ice cream, spoon in hand. The resulting picture that she took and promptly sent us shows him quite bemused at having been caught in a truly cat-out, mouse-will-play moment. Now, by way of a little background, I should say that in the last years of his life, Dad endured a lot of monitoring of what he was doing and how he was doing it, especially when it came to what he was eating, and most especially how much red wine he was drinking. Along with ice cream, red wine gave him great pleasure. Years before, because of AFib, the powers that be had banned him from hard liquor and limited him to essentially one glass of red wine at dinner. Now, he was inclined to more than one glass of red wine at dinner, and this resulted in the constant dinner dance whereby the bottle of red wine on the table was removed from his hand just as he was about to pour more into his glass. Admonitions and protestations followed. So there's also an extremely good chance that sometime before Donna came through the door that afternoon, Dad had ambled by the bar there in the butler's pantry and stopped to examine a few bottles of red wine. Should he have come across one that was open but not completely empty, a hand was most likely extended to the cabinet above, a small glass extracted, and the wine finished off. You know, Dad's great friend Chuck Sieber, who sadly passed away just last month, made the observation when it came to flying that Dad was a bird. It was quite a revelatory observation for me. I had never really fully absorbed that about him, that he was just completely and utterly in that element. Well, 449 Foothill Road was completely and utterly his element too. He knew every square inch and every idiosyncrasy of that house and that property that he first encountered way back in 1949. Dad, you'll be happy to hear that the plumbagos that we wintered over are just starting to bloom out at the pool. The pool, by the way, is crystal clear, and we've had some good swimming days. I think we pruned the butterfly bush perfectly this spring. It's having a stellar year. The gutter project still has a few details that need addressing, but I'm sure you've been flying around and checking things out, so you know all this and much more. Dad, here's to endless blue sky days and all the chocolate ice cream and red wine that your heart desires. There's nobody stopping you now, and maybe, just maybe, there's nobody interrupting or not giving their full attention to your stories. Thank you.
In the early years, Dad and I didn't have the smoothest of relationships. I was an exasperating and troublesome and impatient child. Well, also as a teenager, and as I think of it, as a young adult, I argued about every imaginable subject. He argued right back. Somehow we overcame this, or did we? We argued to the end, so similarly stubborn and strong-willed, but we loved each other deeply. It was just part of our dance. He loved to pass on knowledge. Dad decided to use a school project as a teaching lesson. Since at the time we lived near Buffalo, a large working-scale model of the Erie Canal was decided upon. We drew designs, sawed the wood, glued it, painted, the outside was red, fitted the locks, filled it with water. Voila! A working Erie Canal in miniature. Mind you, I was in the first grade. And by the way, it's still down cellar. I learned many lessons from him. Dad loved to sit next to a fire during winter. Emulating him over the years, I became as great a fire builder as he, and he even acknowledged it. Of course, we continued to argue over the best way to lay the base, or how much paper to use, whether to crumple or roll, or where to place it. This extended also to the charcoal wood cooking grill outside, where I also took on his mantle of super griller, all the while arguing over the specific intricacies. However, some of the lessons he imparted were innate. He modeled for all of us the importance of loving whatever your chosen métier. Do what you love and love what you do. This was he. This was so even if he was a bit concerned about its difficulty. I was an actress. Very early on in my career, he sent me a rather pointed article from the Wall Street Journal stating that only 10% of actors made it to the very top. Naturally, I was beyond indignant. How dare he? I shall be one of them. Unfortunately, his practicality turned out to be right, but he never discouraged me from continuing my pursuit and actively supported it. Along the way, I learned from him about kindness, generosity, and to never stop being curious, be it a new word. To the end, he kept a dictionary next to his breakfast setting, or a new person met on the side of the road. He too could be exasperating. As most of you sitting here are aware, his hearing wasn't exactly stellar. Not too many years ago, in his late 90s, my job was to telephone him every day at 3 p.m. to remind him to take his pill. This was proving problematic. He also was adamant about his daily swim and naturally had to remove his hearing aids. Not that he necessarily heard the phone when they were in. It regularly resulted in multiple phone calls till I got through. This particular August day, not unlike today, I was calling and calling. No response. It became rather worrisome. At this point, I was sitting on a wall outside a Crate and Barrel store in California. Dad was in New Jersey. I began dialing the usual suspects. Neighbor, great friend Mike. Have you seen Dad today? No. Did you speak with him? No. I telephoned his love, Donna. Where is Dad? No idea, but due at 6 for dinner. Don't worry, he'll show up. Time passes. 6 o'clock comes and goes. Now even Donna is worried. Both of us are dialing everyone we know he knows. All along I kept redialing. Dad, 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 where are you? Someone has long since checked the house, found not to be drowned in the pool, nowhere inside unconscious either. The car was gone. Okay, now I'm calling the police. The Bridgewater police, the Somerville police, the state police. Was there an accident reported involving a white car and a very elderly man? Picturing him marooned, maybe dead, on the side of the road, I checked the ERs. Was he admitted? Nothing. Donna and I back and forth with lack of updates. I'm still sitting on the same wall outside Crate and Barrel, 3,000 miles away, glued to my cell phone. Doubtless you can imagine the terrifying images that anxiety and fear and helplessness generated. What to do but wait, and for what? Sometime after dark, was it 8-ish? The back door into Donna's kitchen swings open, and guess who casually saunters in? Where have you been? Why didn't you answer your phone? Do you know what we've been going through? A look of pure surprise. I decided mid-afternoon to drive up to the 4-H fair. It was wonderful. I had a great time. I always love to go every year. I saw the llamas. I talked to kids. I went to different booths. I sat on a bench. I was busy meeting and chatting with myriad people. He was truly amazed there was such a fuss. It seemed incomprehensible to him. He was so busy it never occurred to him to check in. Relief and then fury flooded over Donna. Should she hug him as tight as possible or kill him after all? I don't remember exactly why he didn't answer his phone. I guess he just couldn't hear it.
Well, you've heard so much from everyone about all the wonderful stories. Thank you all for coming to share this celebration, because it really is a celebration. And as you all well know, that my father would love to be here himself and talking to everyone, enjoying everything. When I think of what special characteristics stand out to me throughout his life, the first is that he really, truly, deeply, passionately cared about improving the quality of life in his community. And this was inspired in World War II when he was sitting around in the evening with fellow airmen in India, and they discussed, what would they do when the war was over and they would go home. And they agreed that they were going to try to make things better in their own communities. Well, my father did just that. In doing so, he persistently and steadfastly stuck to his principles and promises through thick and thin, no matter what the outcome. He actually had many different communities that you've heard from today. He had his neighborhood community, the Bridgewater Township community, the state community, the community of fellow pilots, the church community, the metalworking industry community, and the community of friends. And everyone here today is part of one and sometimes several of those communities. Secondly, he was very disciplined. His discipline was honed by his experience as a bomber pilot and commander in World War II, and that served him well through his years as a private pilot. It also served him well in staying in superb physical shape year after year. He performed an exercise regimen every morning when he woke up through the time he was 102. And it involved stretching and toning. And, even at 100, he could still juggle 4 balls, dribble a basketball, work a yo-yo like a pro, and swim many laps, 20-plus laps in the swimming pool every day, all summer. He was equally disciplined about food. He carefully composed his breakfast, and it always included cereal or oatmeal, milk, skim milk, half a ruby grapefruit, which I'm sure is one reason why he made it to 102, a few red grapes, mixed nuts, and a multitude of vitamins and minerals. It put all the rest of us who depended on black coffee for breakfast to shame. So maybe a handful of red grapes, which he had every day, and another handful of nuts, which he had every day, are the secret to long life. Admittedly, as you've also heard, his nutritional discipline faltered when confronted with the prospect of ice cream. The third, and perhaps the most important characteristic, was really his insatiable curiosity about the world around him. He was born in 1918 at the height of the Spanish flu in South Texas, which at that time was literally the frontier of America. He lived without electricity until 1936 with rural electrification. And then in the war, he found himself flying every possible airplane in every possible condition all over the world. But he was always throughout his life, as you've heard, ready to embark on a new adventure, large or small, from checking out what summer flowers were blooming along the roads out in the township and the county, to what was going on at the county fair, to what was going on in the neighborhood, or he was all up for flying to the next Oshkosh air show. In fact, curiosity is one of the characteristics that's mentioned many times by centurions as their secret to living so long, and perhaps that was his. His curiosity contributed to a vast store of general knowledge. He knew how to do everything. He could design and build complex machinery. He could fix a toilet. He knew how to all the ins and outs of painting a house properly, and he could graft a fruit tree. This did contribute to the cellar, our very large cellar, filled with jars of salvaged screws, nails, bolts, pieces of metal and wood that were ready to be used for almost any project or job that might occur. Well, it's said that it requires a village to raise a child. Well, it also takes a village to live long enough to celebrate your 102nd birthday. Many village members who enriched his life are here today. As you know, and as you heard many times again, really above all else, my father loved and lived to fly. That was his most joyous time, I think, when he was in the air. A special thanks to all those fellow pilots, of whom some are here today, who enabled him to participate as air boss, honorary air boss, at the Arsenal of Democracy Washington flyover last September. He looked forward to that. He anticipated that so much, and yet he was so worried that he wouldn't be able to attend because his health was clearly getting worse. I can assure you that being able to go and participate and talk to people and fly one last time in his beloved B-29 was truly a high point of his life. A special thanks goes to everyone also who helped make his 102nd birthday special by Zoom and many more events. He was known to be able to carry out his birthday for at least a week. This began, I think, at 90, but certainly at 100 and 101 and 102, it always lasted a week. So there are many wonderful and memorable things happened during that week. A special thanks to our multi-generational close friends from many, many years ago from Somerville, the Schmeltzes and the Barkers, who braved traffic from Vermont and Massachusetts to get here today. And a special thanks to his village friends who kept up his spirits and watched out for him over the past several years, many years really. Ann and Mike Ryan, Larry Dwyer, David Stempian, Andy Levin, Barry Savar, and Sandy McMath. A special thanks, too, for the medical village. Yes, it did take a village. All those specialists that kept him going. The cardiologist who kept his heart ticking, his urologist who kept things flowing, his physical therapist, Danielle, who kept him moving, his very special surgeon who enabled him actually to attend that Arsenal of Democracy and fly in the airplanes. And a special thanks to his audiologist, Dr. Rose Chauvelin, who blessedly kept his hearing aids in contact with the rest of the world for the past 20 years. A special thanks, too, to Milena Shankwin, whose excellent care, good spirits, and truly delicious lunches allowed him to enjoy being in his own home every weekday for all of his last 3 years. And of course, a special thanks to Ed Nagel and Susie Solberg for hosting this event, which, as you heard, played a very important part in my father's life from 1941 when he first came to Somerville. And finally, a very special thanks to Donna Lazarczyk, my father's companion, his loving partner, and his self-described angel, who for more than the past 20 years, Donna was truly a godsend, giving him a new lease on life, enabling him to keep up with all his many activities, arranging wonderful vacations, traveling with him to events all over the U.S., coordinating his many military-related engagements, and organizing all those memorable birthdays and events such as this one. So once again, thank you one and all for helping come celebrate this wonderful life. And now I hope it's time to eat.
The Air Corps in 1942 adopted a poem, and it was written by the Canadian pilot who was really an American who had gone to Canada so he could join the fight against Hitler. And he was up testing a Spitfire fighter at 30,000 feet. And he was so inspired by it that he thought of some words to a poem. And after he got down, he finished it, and it was titled High Flight. And it went as follows. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting winds along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace where never lark or even eagle flew. And while with silent, lifting mind, I've trod the high, untressed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God.
First and last words and a few in between. So thank you all very much for being here today, and we are going to do a brief benediction, and we're going to do lunch. I'm going to have that. We're going to have that side eat first, and this side can go to the bar. How about that? And please, there's plenty of things to drink over there and plenty of food. And our flyover is going to start in about 15 minutes. So if you're not up at the buffet table or eating, you might want to. Those guys will be taken off, and then they'll be doing several passes, and we'll have a special formation by the Jersey Jerks as the last formation. So beautiful, beautiful day. Thank you.
So right now, there's four T6 Texans that took off, going out over Round Valley, and they're going to rendezvous with C-47.
Right.
What they do, it could be any number. What they do is you'll see a space. So, it'll be great.